Welcome, everyone, to WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, and you're listening to newsstreamingnetwork.com. This is the Going Solo Goodreads Authors Corner, Meet the Author, and this is really, truly one of my very favorite shows. I am so excited about the talent that we bring forward to you all. Those of you that don't know me, I am Cece Shatz. I'm your host here today. I am the Doyenne of relationship building, and I am just thrilled to be able to be with you here today. Now, we've got a terrific guest, but before we do that, I want to share my contact information so that you can reach me if you have any questions, if you'd like to be a guest on our show, or if you just like to chat a little bit about anything. I'm always open for that. But you guys can reach me at goingsolonetwork.com, and my email is goingsolonetwork@gmail.com. So please reach out to me and let's chat because I truly enjoy getting your emails and I answer them personally. They go directly to me and no one else. So let's get on with our show today. We're going to be talking about storytelling. How important is storytelling? And you know what? We have a very unique individual who is an author of many books and knows the ins and outs of storytelling and the power of it. So we have Thomas R. Wilson with us today. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you. It's nice to be able to talk to everyone.
Oh, it's great having you. Now, you're a very unique individual because you have written several books. I'll put them up very quickly here. The books is Glimmer of the Soul, Misfits to Defy, A Broken Church Bell's Echo. And I know you're probably in the midst of also writing another one because you are a professional advocate, a writer, you're a consultant, a business owner, and a sensory friendly event specialist. I want to kind of find out what that is. So tell us a little bit more about you. How did you start realizing that you had this wonderful gift of storytelling? And just share with our audience a little bit about yourself.
Definitely. So I've loved books and writing and storytelling ever since I was real little. My parents would read to me. That was my favorite activity for the longest time. I always like to mention that one of my all time favorite books is All the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. That one has become kind of a signifier of my life at various points. But when I was real little, I knew that I wanted to be a writer. I was actually one of my running jokes is that there's a lot of people who were edgy out there, but try being the 4-year-old that got angry at people because The Raven wasn't read the way that you like by Edgar Allan Poe. Um, I that is actually true. I was a 4-year-old who absolutely loved The Raven ever since then. I have always found that words and storytelling and writing are one of the true great art forms of humanity. Um, Ever since I was real little, and kind of a big point in my life was when I was introduced to several storytellers, Edgar Allan Poe, Dr. Seuss. But also, when I was really young, I went to a storytelling festival with my mother. Was introduced to some of the great storytellers that had come across the country to be there. And I remember hearing a storyteller do a little bit of the Odyssey from Greek mythology. And I remember looking to my mom and said, I'm going to be a storyteller. I'm going to do this. And the great thing about my mother has always been that if I wanted to do something, her response was, all right, then do it. Don't just say it, make it happen. And
Right.
that instilled a very strong mentality of industriousness, of ambition in me from a young age. And my works in particular, and a lot of my storytelling is well, all of it really is inspired by my own experience with mental health and neurodiversity and many other diagnosis and lived experience that for so many of us kind of keeps us down, and for a long time it did for me. But having that background of do something, be something, if you want to do it or be it, really inspired me to understand that I want my storytelling to help people go through that are going through depression, anxiety, neurodiversity, lived experience, whatever it is. And I have always wanted to be that storyteller that has something with a purpose, something that identifies and connects us to human beings. Because I do believe my philosophy has always been that stories have existed as long as human beings have been around, from cave drawings to art to all of these mediums, because human beings need stories. We need to be able to connect to them. They inspire us, they uplift us, they help us reach our sadness in a healthy way, and they ultimately help us to understand ourselves and our fellow human beings on a deeper level. So having that purpose, I've had used my own story through also being a trained peer specialist, a reading mentor, a teacher, and many of the things listed on my introduction as well in my information. But I also have discovered that there is nothing like a good story when you need a good story. And so that's kind of a very brief, very varied introduction to why I do what I do. But I believe it so truly.
You're so right. I mean, I went to the movies this weekend, and movies are simply stories, right? They're
Mhm.
stories on the big screen, and so sometimes I think the stories that go up on the big screen start out a lot of times in books because people really do need to connect. Number one, connect, right? And the other thing is we kind of need to lose ourselves a little bit, lose ourselves in within the characters of the book and really kind of step out of our world into someone else's world for a temporary safe environment. And so yeah, it's truly great. And then we have the informational type of books where you learn a great deal and you broaden your horizon and I feel like you raise your vibration when you learn something new. You definitely step into that. So yeah, I mean, storytelling is truly amazing, and it takes a gift of an individual to be able to do that. I'm not one of them. I'm more of a fact type of person, but I'm not one that can step out. And I will say, my ex-husband, he was a wonderful writer, and there are many stories that he wrote. I could read them, and then I felt like I was stepping into that world, and that was a very unique experience. So I applaud you for being able to do that and be able to bring people to the other side and understand who they are. But that was a gift I think that he had that he didn't really pursue, because he of course went into business and did other things. But he did have that talent, and so I realized then storytelling is certainly a talent that someone might very well have, and so it intertwines, doesn't it, with a bit of reality and a bit of fiction and fantasy, doesn't it?
It really does. I often believe the best stories have that human connection to them. I'm actually going to be leading a class for a group of youth on writing a modern villain. One of and it's the focus is on a few things. One, understanding how villains have changed in media over time, but the other thing is understanding that a good villain doesn't necessarily need to be insane or diabolical or their ambitions. I'm actually a big believer that we need to take the idea of a villain and remove that from mental health. Because I feel like one of the easiest ways to write a lazy villain is to slap a mental health diagnosis on them and have that be the motivation.
Mhm.
Um, so in this, what I'm going to be help teaching them learn is the idea that a villain can be empathetic, but a villain can also be someone who's just lost their way or thinks that they're doing something good because it helps certain groups of people or helps serve them. But the idea is that, sometimes the best villains are people who are just hurting and are afraid and are trying to do something that they really do believe is going to help many people around the world. They just have a different mindset from what the hero might, or even what those people might think themselves. And there's been this great movement in media in general to make villains a little bit more understandable or make them believe that they're doing something good for the world or whatever it may be. And
Mhm.
that human connection allows us to understand them far better.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that sometimes when you see a story or you read a story, um, the villain is not necessarily someone that's, you know, not from the ordinary, right? They're an individual that's just looking at life a little bit differently. And sometimes in the story, within the story, they are able to, um, within your words or their words or whoever wrote the story, can twist and turn it and make the villain turn out to be a pretty great person, you know, and while opening their eyes. So I love the journey that a story will tell us, you know, like it starts out one way and you know, when we end the story, it's totally something different. So it's very unique and very buildable on that. So you actually teach young people to start this process to begin, because here's the thing is a lot of people have a great story within them and they just don't know how to put it pen to paper, right? And so you actually teach the young people to be able to, the young individuals to be able to kind of tap into that and be able to start being creative within themselves to allow themselves to write. And I think that's wonderful. I think many people, even us more mature people, have we have a story within us that we've never actually written. So tell us a little bit about the courses that you do. Now, do you do them online or do you do them in person?
So I do them both online and in person.
Okay.
So I work a lot with the neurodiverse, mental health, LGBTQ plus
Mhm.
communities, and many others. Um, and within that, I acknowledge that there are more people within the LGBTQ plus community that I'm not mentioning. Part of that is because I actually stumble with very similar sounding letters. So I want to make sure people do hear that and know that I'm not trying to be mean and not mentioning that. But um, I do work with these people. I actually work with youth. I work with teens all the way through adults of older age.
Mhm.
And so I run several programs. I've actually just started with an organization where I'm going to be working with those communities, helping them learn things like those classes. But I run programs like Dungeons and Dragons. I
Mhm.
have just launched a program called Creative Mentorship, which is a program that offers mentorship but in a creative space. So, and it's designed around empowering youth to chase their creative passions, but also build real life skills, very similar to the Dungeons and Dragons I do.
Mhm.
I also do a lot of storytelling, public speaking, centered around helping people understand how to connect to the communities I work with, and
Mhm.
those within the communities actually understand that they're not alone. And all of my programs are designed around the idea that stories, storytelling, active play are things that are, like I said earlier, connected to the storytelling will help us to understand ourselves better
Mhm.
by utilizing those creative passions. And I think it's something not a lot of people think of when they think of how to develop. Like, a lot of people go to school or regular classes, and everything I do is built around the idea that a person centered mindset, that an empathic leadership style, that patience, being willing to listen, making sure that I am not the only one talking, that other people's voices just matter as much, if not more, depending on the scenario, as well as intentional and mindful questions. These are all things that we need to apply more and more into our stories, into our daily lives. And even myself, I work every day to try to do that more and more because getting stagnant is a very dangerous thing in this world. All of these elements are so important, and so many people miss them and they're not given that opportunity.
Mhm.
So in all of my programs, it's either one-on-one or with a group, and those are all implemented. And it's also really based off the mentality that a strengths-based mindset is going to help people grow faster and more confidently than what is so often thrown at youth, adults, anyone with lived experience or with a diagnosis, because that's what we're taught. We're taught to shame ourselves. We're taught to internalize our guilt versus if we can build someone up, they're going to have a healthier relationship with their education.
Oh, very well said. Very well said. That's wonderful. I realize that those that are creative, their brains work differently, right? When you talk about, mental, and I think that's really kind of what it is. I've noticed, I have a son that is extremely, extremely creative. And they're all creative in their own right. I mean, I think I've got 5 children. They're all creative in their own space, but I have one son that's was always growing up was truly creative and misunderstood a lot of times, I think, within his life, but it was because I believe that his brain worked differently. He was very, very creative. He looked at life differently. He looked at objects and things differently. And when I'm a terrific artist, and he does digital art now, and he's fabulous. But with saying that, it didn't take much for somebody to put him down, right? Instead of bringing him up. And he was a lot more sensitive to um, individuals being negative to him, which was sad because they didn't understand him. They didn't get it that he was artistic. They didn't understand that he had a different path in life than what we have, right? Many of us think about going into business and whatever, where he was thinking about going into a different area. So, yeah, I mean, I love the idea of what you're doing and that you're taking those that have this special gift because it truly is a gift. I mean, it to be artistic and to be able to write and draw and do all of those things that require storytelling. It's not something that everyone has, but those that have it are extremely unique and sometimes I believe misunderstood, aren't they?
I very much agree.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've learned over the course of my career is there's a lot of things that I can mention within the school system, within the ways that education are in the United States and so many other places in the world. And I always try to make sure it's not negative in itself, but I think one of the great flaws of the mindset around youth, or the mindset around creativity, um, is the kind of idea that if someone does something I don't like, I expect them to be better. Or like when it comes to art, like I'm going to give this person this bit of feedback so they can become better.
Mhm.
And both of those kind of mindsets have a very antagonistic kind of reality to them.
Mhm.
For youth, when they do something, I think a lot of people don't realize, for many people who are on the spectrum or have different elements of neurodiversity or mental health or anything like that, there are patterns of behavior, but those patterns of behavior have kind of oddly been mixed into society as negatives. And
Right.
I do think there is a lot of ableism and a lot of other avenues
Mhm.
that have caused that. Um, but the other thing within that, very similar to the I'm going to give someone negative criticism so they can be better, is the idea that those are very easily internalized. But it also kind of perpetuates this idea that negative criticism is actually a good thing a lot of the time, because a lot of us aren't taught how to deliver that effectively.
Mhm.
And like we see it online on book reviews, product reviews, all of these things. And so now in this age where media and all these things are so accessible, people aren't really taught how to deliver that effectively. So people are often a lot harsher. They're a lot more brutal in how they say things. And a lot of what I run into is, when things are praised well, they are praised well, but people get so passionate about their critiques that we forget the other person at the other end is human, and then it
Mhm.
gets torn apart. And the reason I try to challenge these mentalities is because there's almost like this false righteousness about critiquing people in the arts,
Mhm.
because so often when we give constructive advice, which is not actually constructive, we're putting someone down and lowering them below the level of the people who review them, and
Mhm.
ultimately hurting them. And I think a lot of us are taught that because we've been hurt, and we are taught so often to hurt others when we are hurt.
Right.
It's this really vicious cycle.
Yeah, it is. And you got to understand too that when someone gives a review, it's their perspective, right? It's
Mhm.
simply their perspective of whatever it is that that they've seen or heard or read, so it's, we can only take that with a grain of salt. And, I hope that people do understand that. You try to give an honest review. I mean, I do review a lot of times products and services and things like that. But when you're reviewing someone's talent of art, whether it be a book or a painting or something like that, I think you need to be a little kind, because it is truly your perspective. Someone else may think it's absolutely marvelous, where you might not like it, and that's your taste, and that's fine. I remember I went to an art gallery one time with my son, and we were looking at pictures, and some of them, they were famous artists, right? And I said to him one time, I said, "Well, this is a very dark painting." I said, "Look at this." And so we stopped and we looked at it and we talked about it, how dark it was and whatever. And I said, "See this?" And I said, and then as we went through this individual's paintings, we noticed that there was lighter ones. There were, you could tell the spirit was lighter. And I said, "Well, I think it's the way the person felt at the time they did the painting, right?" So there were lighter ones, and then it started getting a little bit dark and a little bit dark and then very dark, right? And I said, "I think this person was going through something at the time they did this artwork." And so we later on looked it up, and sure enough, they were going through a very bad time. I believe that there was like some death and stuff like that within him, and so his family, and so that was portrayed in his artwork. So there again, it's really what the person is thinking when they're actually writing or doing their art or doing whatever their craft is. And so we need to honor that and respect that too, because you don't know what that person's going through at the time that they're doing what they do. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk a little bit about, I want to know about the sensory friendly event, okay, specialist. I want to know a little bit more about that, but I also want to give our audience a little bit of a taste that if they felt they have maybe a story within them, how do they go about expressing that? What are some of the very first steps that they could do to start maybe writing this down? And so maybe we could talk a little bit about that when we get back. So you guys, we're listening to Thomas R. Wilson. He is a professional advocate, writer, consultant, business owner, and a sensory-friendly event specialist. We're talking about the power of storytelling, and he's a wonderful author himself. He has 3 books out, and I know there's probably more within him. Glimmer of a Soul, Misfits to Defy, A Broken Church Bell's Echo. And you can get all of those right there on Amazon, amazon.com. I want to share with you how you can reach him before we take our quick break. You can email him at ndttrpg@gmail.com, or you can check out his website, which is rhstorytellingcircle.com. And I put up his link tree. You can go to linktree/NDTTRPG, find out all of the stuff, because he's got tons of things that you could be able to connect with him. But what an individual you are, what a unique, creative individual you are, and what a true, just a wonderful show that we're having here today with your creative self. And I just, I'm just overwhelmed with the fact that you're such a great author, and that you inspire those around you to be able to get that story out, that story that you have from within. So we're going to come back. We're going to talk about how to begin. If you think you might have a story within, and maybe you should ask yourself, do you have a story? So we're going to talk about that when we come back with our wonderful author today, Thomas R. Wilson. We'll be right back. Welcome back to WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. You're listening to the new streamingnetwork.com, home of Going Bold and Going Solo. We want to thank you all for listening us to it today. Okay, a little tongue-tied there. Well, Going Solo Goodreads Author's Corner, Meet the Author. And I love this program. I love this show. It is so great. I am Cece Shatz, your host here today. I am the Doyenne of relationship building. We're talking about the power of storytelling. We all have a story within us. We just sometimes do not know how to get that out. And so we have our wonderful author here today, Thomas R. Wilson. He's a professional advocate, writer, consultant, business owner, and a sensory-friendly event specialist. But before we get into telling you how, not telling you, sharing you, and connecting with you on how to get your story out, let's talk about what is a sensory-friendly event specialist. What is that?
So, a sensory friendly event specialist, I the easiest way to say that is it's someone who honors the idea of accessibility, the idea of the way that sensory issues or diagnosis or lived experience impacts us. So, to give it a little bit more fleshed out of a detail, one of the great examples I give to contrast my work, and I always preface this, I love concerts, I think they're great. Um, but I always reference concerts because if it's a big concert, even if it's a small concert, you could have hundreds to thousands of people. They are packed together in spaces. They have, a lot of noise. Once the music starts, so often it gets very loud. People sing along. And if you're looking for a space to go to calm down, often you have to leave the space entirely and walk out. Even then, you have the lights on at night in a city. You have people you don't know walking by you. And the reason I give that is I find it so different than what I do because my focus is built around, first off, honoring that accessibility is more than just a physical thing. True accessibility is really this idea, at least how I view it, is this idea that it's a mental component, it is a sensory component, it's an emotional component. Depending on what you're doing, it could be a spiritual component.
Mm.
It's how you handle lighting, it's how you talk to people. And I'm a big proponent of that because I find a lot of people forget those aspects. And you can't have true accessibility without honoring all of who a person is because that's just not accessible. And so within the work that I do, whatever event I do, I try to make sure that as people walk in, they are treated with respect, they are greeted with a smile. And I'm not saying like fake smile, I mean like genuine interest in a human being. Um, I make sure that the lighting is good for them. I make sure that my tone is good for them. Some people may be picking up that my voice is a little quieter, a little bit more even. And part of that is my own experience and understanding this tone of how I talk and how to try to register a tone that is kind, considerate, but does not necessarily sound condescending to people.
Mm.
And so when I apply all of these things, that is my focus. When I set up an event, I make sure all of these components are very much there. When I'm running the event, I make sure that I avoid all of my people's triggers. I make sure that I do not yell or get too enthusiastic. That I encourage people to have fun within the I don't want to say confines, but within the measures that work for other people. I help make sure the communication between people is kind and considerate. And there's so much more that I could get into, so much more than we have time for today. But it is built around the idea of working with people who have these needs, who have these desires, and even people who may want to break. They don't have any lived experience. They want to try something a little different, a little bit more low key. They get to experience that. And one final thing, I mentioned this really briefly, but I find one of the best ways to run an event, to be an event friendly, a sensory friendly event specialist, is to make genuine human connections.
Mm.
That people can understand that you're going to be even when there's conflict, you're going to be able to resolve it without it going out of control. You're going to be able to appreciate and value the people who are coming if they have PTSD or they have other trauma or fears. It's really so much of what it is about a person's personality when they are running an event, and the energy and the kindness you breathe into a space. I always wonder if at least one person listening is going to roll their eyes when I say energy, just because it's a hippy dippy term. It's not something a lot of people really think a space can have. But what I mean by that is just the kindness that you exhibit, the willingness to listen, the ability to put the ego aside. And I use the
Mhm.
word energy because when I am running an event, that emotional kind of energy I put in the room very much becomes the expectation in that space. And people can walk in and breathe that in and know that they're gonna be respected. And like I said, there's so much more that I could go into involving that, but it's so many of those elements and more, and
Mhm.
making sure that they are consistently and regularly applied.
Right. That's pretty great. I know I run events myself, and I agree with that energy. I agree with that. I mean, I think and Tom, what is it, Tony Robbins, he's all for that energy, right? When you go into one of his events, I mean, you just step in the door and you're wham smack right into the into the full stream of energy. So energy is very, very important. But again, you want it according to your audience that you're going to be having the event with, and then also that being able to connect with the individuals, and that's what's so important. And I do value that. I do understand that completely. Well, let's talk a little bit about storytelling. So let's say we've got a story within us and we don't know, we're not sure, because I think everybody's got a story within them, right? So if we're thinking about starting to write this story, what is the kind of the first steps that we do?
I love that question. I think it differs so much from person to person and
Hmm.
all of these ideas. But the advice that I would give most people, there are a few things. When you're getting ready to write it, the first thing I would say is make sure you draw the boundaries of what you're willing to tell and what you're not, both internally but also with the intended audience. I learn more and more each day how important boundaries are. One of my favorite one of my favorite phrases I ever heard was the boundaries are a gift for me and for you. And when we start formulating our story, it's so important to know what we want to tell, but it's also so important that if there's other people who are going to be a part of their story, that their boundaries are respected.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to write this, 200-page book, and then someone gets deeply upset because you overshared and you can't tell something. You have to start over or cut something out. The other thing that I would say is, um, if there is something you are really passionate about on your story, focus on that, because I find you can't fake passions. Human beings are so good at knowing when someone cares about something and when they don't. Even if you're the best writer in the world, people will know if you are just phoning in your passion on something.
Hmm.
And the last thing that I would say that I think is a little different is understand your connection to your story, not just on a mental capacity, not just on an emotional, but like, know your story, know what it is about it that makes your heart flutter, what about it, what you're comfortable with, what other people are comfortable with, what about it makes you stay up at night thinking about it.
Hmm.
And try to have those internal dialogue questions and build those ideas off yourself, and all of these kind of play into each other. But you should be excited, you should want to tell your story. And I think the thing that would kill it the most is if you didn't have that. If your story doesn't keep you up at night, doesn't make you excited, doesn't make you want to pursue it, then it's not a story worth telling, in my opinion. And that may change over years. and your story may be of more value then, but all stories, and I mean, we all have beautiful stories, but our
Mhm.
story should have all of these components and make us want to tell them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was when you were talking about that, I was thinking about, that the new show out now everybody's talking about is that Bridgerton, right?
Mhm.
And within that movie, there's so many little stories, right? Of each character, all of the little stories that are within each one of those. And so, I mean, I think that would make, I don't know if that is a book or not, but I mean, it's a terrific book if somebody is going to write it. But I love the idea of thinking about it that way. So dissecting it, right, into each, whatever character you have and their stories. Like if you're going to start with a family, each individual has their own story, right? They're going and so yeah, so it's very interesting on how to do that. So do you like start out with like an outline or something like that to be able to start putting it together? How do you like start putting pen to paper?
It really depends on the story for me. What I've done in the past is I've recorded myself telling my story. Sometimes I'll start with telling myself the story out loud. Um, I know more and more authors who are doing that, and I know it's a bit awkward to talk to yourself depending on who you are. But I found a lot of the time when I can tell myself the story and I can go back and change it and practice that, it's then easier for me to write it down. Another thing that I've occasionally done is if I personally do some digital doodling, so I'll start with some art and build off from there. My attempts vary very much on the story and how it goes, but what I will say is there is nothing like putting pen to a paper, pencil to paper, and kind of starting with that verbal vomiting, as people call it, just like writing and writing until you think you're done. Because the thing I love about that is so often it surpasses the mind's internal critic when you're
Mhm.
doing it, and it can push you to get ideas out. And even if one line is what you really like, from that, it's still one line of a
Mhm.
story that you want to tell, and there's so much that can grow from that.
Yeah, very good advice. I had to write one time a chapter in a book, and I put it off and put it off, put it off because I was like, I'm not a writer, I'm a talker, right? I love the idea of being able to talk into a microphone or something. That would work for me. But eventually I thought, okay, it's due like the next day, and so I got up that the day it was due. I got up that morning and because I'm a morning person, I'm fresh in the morning. And so I got up and I said, okay, God, you got to make this happen. So I sat down and I knocked it out like in a half an hour, this whole chapter. I mean, it just flooded out. And then I sent it and I didn't really edit it or anything. I just thought, I'm just going to do it. And I sent it and I sent it to the author of the book who was collaborating, putting all of it together. And I said, make any changes you want on it. But I don't know if I could do much more. But yeah, and she said it was wonderful and she hardly made any changes, just some little grammar stuff. But yeah, and it went to press. But yeah, it's like, and I realized then that we do have something that's within us, and we should not let fear and what maybe other people might think about it. Don't let that stop us from doing it. And so you're a wonderful individual. And I want to thank you so much for being on the show and sharing with the young people and helping them being able to understand that like you said, you touch a lot of individuals that have I don't even want to say it's a handicap. They're just different. They have abilities that are different and that maybe need to be embraced a little bit more. And you help them through that, so which is wonderful. And so I think we should all think about that and maybe get of our own way, like you say, get out of your ego, right? And start writing your own story. So thank you so much. And the power of storytelling is just tremendous because we see it everywhere. If we just look around, we see the stories that are unfolding. So thank you so much. We are going to have to close the show. Any last words you'd like to share with our audience?
The last thing I would say is just if you have a story you really want to believe in, you want to tell, um, last thing I'd say would just be courageous. Have that mentality. If I want to do something, I'm gonna do it because it can do
Mhm.
a lot of good in this world.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, you guys, if you are having a little struggle with it, I'm sure Thomas would be more than happy to help you. He is a professional advocate, a writer, consultant, business owner, and a sensory friendly event specialist. Definitely contact him, and you can do that by emailing him at ndttrpg@gmail.com. His website is RH Storytelling Circle. Yes, storytellingcircle.com, rhstorytellingcircle.com. And then I put up his link tree. So you just go to link tree and then it's backslash NDTT RPG. If I can do it right, Linktree backslash NDTTRPG. That's what it is. Now run out and get his books because we want to support our authors here today. Glimmer of Soul is one book. Misfits to Deny is another book. Defy. I'm really having trouble this morning. So Misfits to Defy, A Broken Church Bell's Echo. So those are the three books. You can find them right on Amazon.com. And of course, you can reach out to him and he'll share all of that with you. I think this is terrific today, the power of storytelling. Thank you so much, Thomas. We so appreciate you. And we want to thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you again.
You guys are listening to WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. That is our radio station. Our website is newsstreamingnetwork.com, which is home of Going Bold and Going Solo. This show is called Going Solo Goodreads Author's Corner. Meet the author. And we have our wonderful author here today, Thomas R. Wilson. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. I am Cece Shatz, and I am so pleased to be with you today. And I'm looking forward to being with you again, sharing another one of our wonderful authors. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now.